Hello, my name is Dean Robison. I'm the Senior Vice President of Customer Success at InsideSales.com, and I'm joined in this particular portion of our agenda today talking about customer success and sales acceleration with Jim Steele, our Chief Customer Officer at Inside Sales, and Dan Steinman, the Chief Customer Officer at Gainsight. Dan, I'll kick it over to you to do a quick little intro of yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Really a pleasure to be here with everybody, even though it's via video. So Dan Steinman, I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Gainsight. I built the customer success and the services team at Gainsight over the last 4 years. Prior to that, I was a VP of customer success at Marketo for a couple of years through some of their hypergrowth there, and built the original customer success team and managed the renewals team as well before that. And then prior to that, we won't go all the way back, but lots and lots of jobs that were customer success oriented, but not necessarily by that same name, since that didn't become cachet until the boys at Salesforce coined that phrase in the middle of the 2000s. So really happy to be here.
Excellent. Speaking of the boys at Salesforce, I'm joined by one of those fellow alum, having come from Salesforce myself, Jim Steele, who hired me here at Inside Sales. Jim, we've known each other for quite a while after over a decade at Salesforce. Tell us a little bit about your background and yourself.
Well, I've been here for 1 year now as President and Chief Customer Officer at Inside Sales. And as Dean mentioned, we spent about 12 and a half years together at Salesforce, where we kind of grew up in the SaaS world as pioneers, and it was just a lot of fun. I had a similar role there as President and Chief Customer Officer. I think I was officially the first Chief Customer Officer in the industry. When Mark Benioff declared me as Chief Customer Officer, I said, what the heck is that? And he said, whatever you want it to be, just go focus on customers, make them successful, make them happy, and help close a lot of business. And before that, I spent many years at IBM, a couple years at Ariba, and it's been great to be here.
Excellent. So I've got a bunch of questions for the two of you, and we're going to go ping pong and back and forth, just in kind of traditional news show format here. So Dan, the first question for you: how does a strong customer success program accelerate sales?
Yeah, I think it certainly should. If it's done well, it should absolutely be a sales accelerator. I think there's a couple of ways. One is obviously building advocacy in your install base leads to referenceability. And not only referenceability, but advocacy by itself, where people are talking to other people without being prompted by us or asking us for references. I think that's a really undervalued, or at least underestimated, value proposition for customer success. Building advocacy is huge. We just find over and over when we close a deal and dig into that somewhere along the way, that customer who just bought from us talked to another customer of ours without us doing that introduction. So I think that's huge. The other thing is that salespeople and your sales deck should probably include your customer success function, or at least your approach to customers in the deck as a sales differentiator. Because I find customers care a lot about what technology we're selling them, but they really care a lot about what that journey is going to be like. And do we have our act together with regard to leading them through that journey? So that's a couple of areas I've found that are really valuable as far as accelerating sales.
Excellent. Jim, and what have you found over the years?
Well, I completely agree with Dan. You know, as good as we think we are as salespeople and we get paid to go sell, there's no better salesperson than a happy customer. They have the credibility, they've got the experience, they're much more objective about their view of a vendor, and they're only going to praise the vendor if they're actually experiencing success. So that's number one, just having strong customer references. That's absolutely at the top. If we make our customers successful faster, they will consume our technology faster. They'll want to add on, order more. It's a cross-sell, upsell opportunity. When you think about it, when you plant the seed in there, you're typically, with a SaaS environment in particular, you're getting your foot in the door, and based on that customer success in that department or that division, then they will expand to the whole enterprise. And that's what we saw at Salesforce over all those years. We started with some of our biggest customers with just a footprint at Cisco and at Merrill Lynch and at Dell. They became multi-million-dollar customers over time because we helped them see the success in using our solution.
Excellent. So Jim, back to you. And so what are some of the best ways and innovative ways you've seen a sales team introduce that concept of customer success in the sales cycle. Is there just a way, does somebody spring it on them? Is it just loaded in a deck somewhere, or is there just a neat way to get that entire value-added program post-sale introduced early on for that customer?
I think it's a differentiator when you go in and you're talking to a prospect that's never met you before, and you share with them how you are tied to their success, that we don't take our customers for granted. We're only successful if you're successful. We bring in the customer success team, not because they're there to sell necessarily, but to share these success stories. And sharing those stories gives that customer confidence, and it gives them that feeling of being able to take that leap of faith with you. And I know, like when we hired you, Dean, at Inside Sales, at first you only had the customer success organization. You did not have kind of the whole end-to-end with the solution consultants. By combining the two, you're able to help in the pre-sale cycle as well as the post-sale, and having that kind of life cycle experience with the customer was really important, kind of end to end. We're here from the beginning right through your success and renewal.
That's great. Dan, anything to add on that? Especially, what if those customers that maybe can't afford to have a high touch experience? Is there a way to introduce the low touch experience, or anything that you want to riff off of what Jim said?
Yeah, I'm in violent agreement with everything that Jim said, so that's a good thing. Big believer that not only is customer success a differentiator, but it really matters a lot to the customer, not in just what we do, but in our ability to explain what's going to happen in their journey. And customer success is a big part of that. I find customers are, without denigrating them, a lot like smaller children who need to have something mapped out for them so that they understand what's going to happen. And customers will put up with a lot more from us, i.e., being touched by multiple different people, if that process is explained and if they feel like there's an advocate for them. And that's that trusted advisor role that customer success brings. So that's actually relatively straightforward to do for high touch customers, because we've been doing that literally for 30 years in the software industry. But as you mentioned, Dean, the lower touch ones, it's a real art form that's just being shaped, I think, in the industry today. And that is, how do you take advantage of one-to-many functionality to touch customers at scale? How do you use email effectively? How do you use a webinar program effectively? How do you take advantage of the incredible value of your community, your online community, potentially? So there's a number of vehicles available to us, but I think it's one of the areas in the world of customer success that hasn't been adequately explored yet. But over the next few years, because SaaS always creates a long tail, so everyone in the world is worried about scale, and we can't throw bodies at this. So we got to figure out the one-to-many stuff. And I think some of the leading companies are definitely starting to figure that out. And I think it really does bring customer success down to even the lowest paying customers who can get value from us, just not voice-to-voice value, but in a number of other ways.
That's excellent. So back to you, Dan, a little bit of a curveball on this question. Have you seen organizations kind of do it wrong, right? Are there any lessons learned where a selling team may have slowed a sales cycle down by introducing the concept of customer success, or has it always been wine and roses? Does it just go flow and go easily?
Well, curveballs always used to strike me out when I was actually playing baseball, but I never had a chance of making any money at it. So hopefully I can handle this one a little bit better. I think the challenge for salespeople, and I used to be one too, so I can dig myself a little bit here. It's easy to oversell almost anything. It's easy to say, oh, we'll give you a customer success person. They'll take care of you and be side by side with you through that whole process. I find, we have to be really conscious from a sales standpoint about selling what we're actually going to provide. So I think, this is not uncommon that sometimes expectations get raised a little bit too high. And I think one of the first things a good customer success manager has to do is understand what those customer expectations are and get them back in line if they are out of line, because that'll come back and bite you at some point if you don't do that. But I think the cycle of this and the value of this is so apparent to the sales guys that they love the idea that they have a story to tell about what's going to happen after the initial sale, knowing that it has to be a lifetime value proposition for all customers. Even the sales guys have to understand that and buy into that. And I think they do, and they're pretty good at explaining what customer success is really going to do for them over the lifetime of that customer.
That's great. Jim, anything to add to that?
I love the way Dan just described that. I kind of view it as, transaction versus the customer journey. And yeah, if you're just trying to slam down a transaction and get your foot in the door with that initial deal, then maybe, getting customer success involved will slow that transaction down a little bit. But if you're looking at the lifetime, journey that you have with that client, it's imperative, because you might get the transaction, but you're not going to get the lifetime value with that customer if you don't engage the customer success team early on. And to just key off of Dan's point on, the hardest thing to do for salespeople is to set the proper expectations and still win the deal. And I think you establish credibility and that trusted advisor status when you set expectations realistically and then overachieve. And if you're always overcommitting and underdelivering, that gap in credibility is what sinks companies. And you can't sustain a relationship with a customer if that's the way you do it.
Yeah, especially in a recurring revenue business. You just can't afford to have that happen, because it'll cut your legs off over time.
Excellent. This next one's an interesting one, kind of near and dear to my heart. So in the early days of Salesforce, there weren't many partners available to us. We had to really organically deliver all of our customer success capabilities, from professional services and support and everything out there. And then Salesforce grew so rapidly, we had to figure out a way to embrace partners. And I feel that inside sales, we're at that point right now where we're really trying to figure out our partner enablement strategy and really embrace partners and make them successful out there. Jim, any words of advice of how partners and our customer success organizations can team and kind of make one another successful with our selling teams out there and make customers successful jointly?
Well, Dean, you remember at Salesforce, when we joined Salesforce in 2002, we couldn't get any of the big GSIs to even talk to us. They kind of viewed us as this rinky-dink little company, and you have this sign that says no software. You may as well have one that says no services, and they didn't see the big opportunity. And so we had to build our own organization early on to do it. But then Blue Wolf was one of the few partners that actually saw the value of this model early on, and they engaged and embraced us. I will tell you, it is impossible to scale a company to the size of like a Salesforce and the size that we want to be at Inside Sales, and I'm sure Dan at Gainsight, without engaging the partners. You can't do it all by yourself. So the way to do it is to take your best practices, your lessons learned, the technology knowledge, and share it with your partners. Because if you think about the customer success as being the most important part of this cycle, then you want to engage all the relevant resources that can help that customer be successful. And there's no company in the world that possesses all of the talent, all of the technology to help the customers be successful. You have to be collaborative with the partners. That's the only way to do it.
Excellent. Dan, how do you see CS and partners working with one another?
Yeah, I'm going to echo again what Jim said and say thanks again to the Salesforce folks for proving to the world that partnerships and services have to be part of a SaaS revolution as well, not just the old perpetual license and on-premise days, but it's real. And we're kind of at the same stage at Gainsight. This is the year where embracing partnerships is going to be really critical to us as we grow, as we do more enterprise kinds of deals. You got to have those strategic partners. And one of the interesting things that we're finding as a technology provider for customer success people is that companies that have those kinds of partnerships, they by definition get one step removed from their customers because the sale often goes through a partner. But if you embrace those partners as if they work for you under that customer success umbrella, and you apply technology to that problem, you can really bring yourself closer to the customer, and you can enable your partners to be even more successful with those particular customers who are your customers too. And so we're really excited about the idea that the partnership world has kind of yet to be fulfilled from a technology standpoint with regard to customer success. And we love the idea of kind of leading the way, not only in thought leadership, but providing technology out to them to make us more successful as the vendor, but to make our partners, enable our partners to be more successful as well.
Excellent. We're down to the last question, Dan, and we'll fire it right back at you here. And you're uniquely qualified in this one. I know I've recently been in a conference with you and seen you present all about metrics. Usually customer success professional presenting to a chief financial officer or CEO. There's some pretty basic metrics out there around retention and churn and things like that we talk about. But when you're talking to a head of sales and you're talking to that chief revenue officer, what can a customer success professional do for them that would give them confidence, help accelerate sales, and potentially propel that deal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the key aspect of the metrics part of the conversation with sales is continuing, and this is often true, the VP of customer success or chief customer officer, one of their primary jobs is to reinforce with everyone else in the company every day that we're a recurring revenue business. We're not a transactional business. We're a recurring revenue business. And that changes the way sales has to think about sales in a lot of ways, right? Are we truly landing and expanding? Are we trying to maximize the initial deal with every customer? That's a question that we never had to answer back in the perpetual license days. You always maximize the initial deal and then didn't worry about whether the customer could absorb all 10,000 of those licenses or whatever the case might be, right? So I think net retention as a bottom line calculation of the success of your customer success team is the metric I always think of, because if customer success people are doing their job, two good things happen. Customers renew their contracts at high rates and they buy more stuff from you. And the way to measure that is net retention. Now, there's a bunch of other things you got to measure in the short term, but I think that's the number when I talk to VP of sales or CRO, I want to reinforce with them. We're measuring net retention, not did we make this quarter or how big was that last transaction. We're looking at the next 7 or 8 years. What is the lifetime value of that customer? And it's a little theoretical for a lot of sales guys because they don't look past the end of the quarter. But for your leadership in sales, you want them to have real ownership in the company, and they need to be thinking about lifetime value. And the customer success team has to be constantly reinforcing that with the sales guys, because it's easy for them to lose sight of that and just focus on getting deals done.
So, Jim, is there any metric I should be sharing with you? That I'm pretty metrics driven. You've seen my dashboards. Is there anything else I should be providing you?
So, Dean, you know the metrics better than anyone. I mean, the whole focus on adoption, time to value, productivity. But the one thing we probably don't kind of measure in terms of metrics is just the customer stories, the customer success stories, because that's really when salespeople tell stories, it engages the customer. They're interested. It makes it personal. There's an emotional tug on them, versus just sharing numbers. Like numbers, salespeople throw numbers out all day long, and it's not going to have as great an impact as when you share the whole customer story. So to the extent we can hold people accountable for telling us a story, getting your customer to tell the story, ideally, we used to say at Salesforce that, because of this recurring revenue model, we are actually tied to your success. We're not taking it for granted, because it's one thing to win the first deal, but then you want to get the upsell. You want to get the customer on stage at a conference, and you want them sharing that story. I mean, we used to do this at Salesforce. Getting them on stage at Dreamforce was like the pinnacle of success for a customer success and a salesperson, because those stories are forever captured, and you can share them to help you sell more and tell that story.
That's great. So hopefully you'll like my QBR deck tomorrow. I definitely talk about how we're going to do that. That's great. Jim, any closing thoughts talking about sales acceleration here at this summit this year, and for that first time, really focusing on customer success? Any words of wisdom you'd pass on to the audience?
I would just say, from our experience at Salesforce and now with Inside Sales, I mean, sales teams remember, closing deals. They remember making club. They remember going to the President's Club and getting those accolades. But when I think back now on my 38-year career, the thing that I'm proudest of is the customer relationships that I built. And that is really what drives me. It's building that trusted relationship where customers know that you will deliver for them, that they can trust you. And I think back, like in the early days at Salesforce with ADP, like that first year, the customer basically said, look, we're going to give you 1 year, and then you're out if you don't deliver. And here's the list of things you have to do to close the gap. And then the next year they'd come back and say, okay, you did what you had to do. Here's the list for this year. And 13 years later, when Mike Capone, the CIO of ADP, retired, he said, Jim, remember that list from 12, 13 years ago? Here's my list, going forward. And it's that iterative process. It's the engagement with the customer. You're never going to solve all their problems day one. And if you overcommit, they won't believe you anyway. So it's a sustained effort over a period of time where you're engaged, and that's what builds the relationship. And that's what I'm proudest of, and what's the most gratifying part of my career. It's that engagement with the customer.
Excellent. Dan, how about you? Any closing comments for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, to the sales guys, I think this is the new world. And one of the things I would want to say to all of you is customer success is your best friend. It truly is. You want your company to be valuable, you got to embrace customer success. The old days, we used to think about pre-sales and post-sales. We can't think that way anymore. This is about acquisition and retention, and the sales motion never ends. And think about customer success as your SEs for the install base. They are greasing the skids, doing everything they can to make sure that those ongoing sales transactions happen, both renewals and upsell. And so don't resist this, because we're never going back. We're not going back to perpetual license. SaaS is here to stay. Everyone's going to be on subscription. The number of businesses and the kinds of businesses that are moving to subscription is just mind-boggling. So don't resist this. Open your arms, embrace, go give your customer success people a hug, because they need you to be successful and you need them to be successful. So don't walk away from this without feeling like you're part of that and needing to embrace that for everybody to be successful.
That's excellent. And with that, Dan, I would like to put a shameless plug in. Back on Monday, at my doorstep, Amazon delivered a nice little gift for me, which is a brand new book on this topic, on customer success, written by somebody. The guy in the middle here, Dan Steinman, now published author on customer success. And then even more interestingly, on the back cover, there is a little note of praise here from one Mr. Jim Steele. So definitely taking a look at the book and kind of peruse some of this. A lot of stories I recognize from the old days. So it was great to see. But definitely now out and available. Your nearest bookstore, definitely available on Amazon.com. But a book on all about customer success if you want to know about it. So, Dan, any other thoughts as the recently published author of the book?
Yeah, I feel like I should tell you not to drop it, because it's kind of my baby. I don't want you to drop my baby.
Oh, I'm taking care of it.
We're obviously really proud of it, and thank you, Jim, for being one of the endorsers of it. You'll also notice the name on the front who wrote the foreword, Maria Martinez, who in some ways is kind of the industry-wide leader of customer success. And the very first chapter is the story of how customer success began at Salesforce. So it's a fun book. There's a lot of practical application of it. It's kind of looking both backwards at the history of customer success and forwards with what we think it might be in 2 or 3 years, although it's hard to predict in the technology world. Things change so rapidly, but really proud of it. I think everyone will enjoy reading it. And thanks for doing the shameless plug for me, Dean. I appreciate that.
Not a problem. Happy to help. All right, Jim and Dan, thank you so much for helping me here with this presentation on customer success and sales acceleration. Thank you.